What if the biggest upheavals of our time, the wars, the bitter political divides, that creeping sense of spiritual emptiness, were all foretold? Not in some ancient scroll buried in a desert cave, but in the private writings of a 20th century American woman. An advisor to presidents whose most terrifying visions were kept under wraps because she believed the world just wasn't ready to hear them. For decades, her most personal writings lay waiting, filled with prophecies she felt were too alarming to reveal in her lifetime. She wrote of a profound spiritual crisis that would grip the soul of the nation. She saw a false global peace, a beautiful lie that would deceive the entire world. Now, years after her death, people are looking back at those pages, and many are starting to believe that everything she saw is starting to come true. Her name was Jeane Dixon, and this is the story of her most chilling predictions. To understand the prophecies, you have to understand the prophetess. Jeane Dixon, born Lydia Pinkett in the early 1900s, was not your typical mystic. She wasn't a product of the New Age counterculture. In fact, she was a devout Roman Catholic who always insisted her abilities weren't her own, but were a gift from God. From her earliest days, she claimed to see visions, glimpses of a world beyond our own. Her mother, a woman of deep faith, raised her on scripture and taught her to see God's hand in every mystery. This became the bedrock of her life. While others might have turned to the occult, Dixon turned to prayer. She believed her visions were spiritual warnings, a call for humanity to turn back to God. This is crucial because Dixon didn't see the future as a set of fixed, unavoidable events. She saw it as a choice, a spiritual crossroads where our decisions would seal our destiny. Her journey from a quiet, prayerful girl to a national figure started with small, startlingly accurate predictions that blew her family and friends away. But it was a chance encounter with a fortune teller in California that really set her on a public path. The woman read her palm, gave her a crystal ball, and declared she would become a famous seer who would advise the powerful. And pretty soon, the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. started to listen. She became known as the Seeress of Washington, a voice sought out by politicians, celebrities, and even presidents. Jeane Dixon's name was seared into the American consciousness with one earth-shattering prediction. In a 1956 issue of Parade magazine, she made a statement that was both specific and horrifying. The 1960 presidential election would be won by a Democrat, who would then be assassinated or die in office. At the time, it was just another headline. But on November 22, 1963, when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, that prediction exploded into a global phenomenon. Suddenly, Dixon wasn't just some newspaper astrologer, she was a prophet whose vision had tragically come to pass. The stunning accuracy of the prediction launched her into international fame. Yet, even this famous prophecy had its complexities. As the 1960 election got closer, she had wavered, at one point incorrectly predicting Richard Nixon would win. This mix of stunning hits and very human misses made her even more fascinating. She wasn't an infallible oracle. She was, in her own view, a person struggling to interpret the messages she received. Her new fame gave her unprecedented access. President Richard Nixon was one of those who took her warnings seriously. Through his secretary, Rose Mary Woods, Nixon received Dixon's forecasts on national security. White House tapes even reveal a 1971 meeting between Dixon and Nixon in the Oval Office. A year later, just before the tragic Munich massacre at the Olympic Games, Dixon warned of a coming terrorist attack. Around that same time, Nixon created a special cabinet committee on counterterrorism. This wasn't just fortune-telling. This was a woman whose visions were reaching the highest level of government. But what about the prophecies she didn't widely publish? The warnings she felt were too catastrophic, too spiritually sensitive for the world to hear? This is where we look into her more private writings and journals. Fearing she'd be misunderstood, Dixon recorded her most profound visions in personal notebooks. Many of her papers are now held by the Library of Congress, offering a glimpse into the visions she guarded so closely. One of the first great themes that emerges from these writings is a prophecy we might be living through right now, a devastating spiritual crisis. Dixon foresaw a time when faith would slowly erode, not from some big, overt persecution, but from simple apathy. She described a future where people, especially in the West, would feel a deep, gnawing emptiness they couldn't explain. They'd chase meaning in materialism, fame, and pleasure, only to find themselves more lost than ever. She warned that churches would become empty, not because they were banned, but because people would just stop caring. The Bible would be treated like any other book, and the moral foundations that held society together for centuries would start to crumble. Look at the world around us. Does that landscape sound familiar? A world where having a form of godliness but denying its power seems to be the norm. Dixon's vision was that this spiritual vacuum wouldn't stay empty. It would be filled with confusion, division, and despair, creating the perfect environment for a more dangerous deception to take root. She believed this crisis was the foundation for all other dangers, and that without a return to faith, no government could save what was coming. If you're starting to see the patterns of this spiritual crisis in the world around you, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell, because the next revelation from her writings is even more specific. And please share this video with one person you know who's asking questions about the strange times we're in. From the ashes of this spiritual crisis, Dixon's writings warned that a new power would rise. This is her second great prophecy, published for all to see in her book, The Call to Glory, The Coming of a False Global Peace. Dixon claimed to have a vision that the Antichrist was born in the Middle East in 1962 and would make himself known in the future. This leader, she warned, would be a master of deception. He would speak of peace, unity, and tolerance. He'd offer simple-sounding solutions to the world's most complex problems. He would captivate everyone with his charm and his promise of a new, unified world order, a global government that would supposedly end all war and suffering. This vision is a chilling echo of biblical prophecy, which warns of a man of lawlessness who will deceive the world. Dixon saw this figure creating a one-world religion, a system that would merge all faiths into one, but would ultimately lead people away from what she considered true faith in God. Are we seeing the stage being set for this right now? Day after day, we hear calls for global solutions to global problems. The framework for things like a unified digital currency and worldwide surveillance is being built right before our eyes. Dixon warned that this system would be presented as a utopia, a final fix for humanity. But she saw a trap beneath its beautiful facade, a spiritual prison designed to control humanity and sever its connection to the divine. The peace would be a lie, and the unity it offered would come at the cost of freedom and truth. So you have to ask the question, why this renewed interest in Jeane Dixon? She passed away in 1997. So why is the world suddenly rediscovering her most urgent warnings? The answer, it seems, has to do with timing. These warnings weren't sealed in a vault, waiting for a specific date. They were preserved in her books and papers, waiting for the time when the signs she foresaw would begin to manifest. A time when the spiritual crisis was undeniable, and when whispers of a false global peace grew into a roar. The unsealing of these prophecies isn't a physical event, it's a cultural one. It feels like a final alarm bell, a warning sounding just as the world approaches a major turning point. It's a call for this generation, our generation, to wake up and recognize the spiritual battle that might be unfolding around us before it's too late. The information was never meant to cause fear, but to encourage discernment. Re-examining the writings of Jeane Dixon presents a chilling but coherent timeline. First, a spiritual crisis empties people's hearts, leaving them desperate for meaning. Then, into that void, steps a deceptive figure, offering a false peace and a global system that promises everything but delivers only bondage. Now, Jeane Dixon was not always right. Skeptics rightly point to her many failed predictions, even coining the term the Jeane Dixon effect for our tendency to focus on the hits while ignoring the misses. But she was unwavering in her faith and in her most profound visions. She saw her predictions not as an inevitable fate, but as a warning of what could happen if humanity turned its back on God. The signs she described are no longer just whispers in old books. They feel like headlines in our daily news. The question isn't whether she got every detail right, but whether we have the spiritual eyes to see what's unfolding for what it really is. Leave a comment below and share what you've noticed in the world that mirrors these prophecies. What signs do you see? And be sure to return, because Jeane Dixon's writings contained another, even more specific revelation, a vision of a coming war between great powers, with a starting date that is now just around the corner. We'll be looking at that prophecy in our next video. Until next time, don't be afraid, but be aware, and stay vigilant.
This book is your beginner's guide to understanding Scripture. Find peace, build relationships, and discover purpose in today's world. Ready to decode the Bible? Find Bible Decoded available on Amazon now.
If this content blesses you and you'd like to support our mission, you can buy me a coffee or give a super thanks. Every contribution helps us create more content to inspire and uplift others. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos.